in a ballroom drenched in gold light and cruel laughter. Where I was mocked and laughed at for being scarred, he chose me. To dance with me before their eyes. "Dance with me," he said, voice low, steady, threaded with command. I almost laughed, an ugly, bitter laugh born of disbelief. My scar itched under the weight of every gaze. The whispers had already begun to ripple. Her? Why her? He's mocking her. I shook my head, clutching my hands together. No. You don't want... He bent slightly. His words meant only for me. Scars don't hide beauty. They reveal survival. The floor tilted beneath me. I wanted to run, to vanish into the crowd, but something in his voice tethered me. Survival. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Against every instinct screaming in my chest, I placed my trembling hand in his. Gasps rose around us like smoke. His grip was warm, firm, unyielding as he guided me onto the dance floor. The orchestra faltered, then swelled as if the violins themselves were startled by his choice. I felt hundreds of eyes cut into me, 1,000 daggers of disbelief and cruelty. But all I saw was him. His focus unwavering, his steps measured to carry me without falter. "You're shaking," he murmured, guiding me in a turn. "Because they're watching," I whispered back, the words breaking. "Then let them," he said simply, as if the entire world bent to his will. The music wrapped around us. For a heartbeat, I let myself believe I belonged. His hand pressed against my back, steadying me, guiding me through movements I hadn't dared practice since before the fire. And as I moved with him, the scar felt less like a brand and more like armor. But paradise never lasts. A voice, shrill and poisoned with delight, cut through the spell. "Oh, Lance, how charitable," Rowena Hale. His ex, his shadow, the woman with flawless skin and lips that curled like knives. She stood at the edge of the floor, her gown shimmering silver, her smile colder than the marble beneath our feet. Her words sliced through the crowd, feeding their hunger for ridicule. "How noble of you to rescue the poor scarred girl from obscurity," she continued, her laughter like glass breaking. The room chuckled with her. My chest caved in, shame flooding me. I tried to pull my hand from his, but Lance's grip tightened. His jaw hardened, eyes flashing with something sharp and dangerous. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting sharper than hers. The room stilled. Rowena's smirk faltered. He turned, loud enough for every ear to hear. "You mistake kindness for pity, Rowena. This woman needs neither. She stands with me because she belongs here. More than you, more than anyone who hides cruelty behind a smile." The ballroom gasped. I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered so violently I thought the sound would betray me. His words weren't just defense, they were declaration. Rowena's face tightened, but she couldn't answer. The power had shifted, and for once it wasn't in her favor. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to stay. My body trembled between the two urges, caught in the storm of his protection and the weight of the crowd's shock. His hand never wavered, steady as if daring the world to challenge him again. The music swelled once more, but it was different now, wilder, sharper, like the orchestra itself had taken sides. I looked at him, searching for the trap, the joke, the cruel trick I knew must be lurking. But there was nothing in his eyes except certainty, and it terrified me more than cruelty ever could. Because it felt real, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to believe it. So I asked myself the question burning in my chest, the one every whisper in that ballroom demanded. If you were Sonora, would you take his hand or run from the attention? But the truth is, I had felt him long before he spoke. The air had shifted when he entered, a current sweeping through the ballroom, commanding silence and awe. People made space for him the way rivers bend around stone. I remember clutching my glass tighter, praying he wouldn't notice me. My heart had stuttered at the first glimpse of his sharp jaw, the deliberate calm of a man who never hurried for anyone. And yet, his eyes, steel gray, cold to the world, had landed on me. Me, the scarred woman in a borrowed gown. For one dizzying moment, I thought I imagined it, but the longer he looked, the more the noise of the ballroom faded. When he began to walk toward me, each step slow and absolute, I couldn't breathe. Laughter rippled around me, cruel and sharp, but it sounded far away, as if I were trapped in a tunnel. My palms slicked with sweat. The instinct was to flee, to vanish before he reached me. But then he stopped in front of me, unshaken by the sneers, and extended his hand. And the world held its breath. It all started when Sonora Jameson stepped through the gilded doors of the Carrington Foundation Gala, a place she had no business entering. The air itself shimmered with money, thick with perfume that clung to gowns like second skin. Chandeliers cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, their crystals scattering gold light across marble floors, polished to such a shine, she could see the warped reflection of her face in them. Her scar, the mark that had rewritten her life, stared back at her in every glimmering surface. She kept her chin lifted, though the weight of 100 eyes pressed down the moment she entered. The whispers came fast, veiled with the elegance of polite society but barbed enough to draw blood. Who invited her? Look at the scar, shameless. Maybe she thinks the dim lighting will hide it. Sonora pressed her hand against the clutch she carried, fingers trembling slightly against the cheap clasp. The dress she wore had been borrowed from Clarissa, her dearest and fiercest friend. Midnight blue satin with a neckline too daring for her comfort, the gown shimmered faintly in the chandelier light. Clarissa had insisted, "You deserve to look like a queen, Sonora. Even if they don't see it, you will." But queens didn't flinch at whispers. Queens didn't lower their eyes to avoid the sting of cruel stares. The ballroom pulsed with life, champagne fizzing, the metallic ring of crystal flutes clinking, laughter spiking through the orchestra's delicate melody. Couples swept across the dance floor in flawless arcs of silk and diamonds, their movements practiced, effortless. Every woman glittered, every man gleamed, and Sonora felt like a smudge in a masterpiece. She made her way toward the edge of the room, aiming for the safety of shadow where the light didn't quite reach. The marble was slick under her second-hand heels, the satin hem brushing her ankles frayed from too many owners before her. She kept her shoulders squared, though each murmur threatened to hunch her spine. Why had she agreed to this? Clarissa's voice echoed in her head. Because you deserve to be seen, not hidden, not erased. Seen. The word tasted bitter. Sonora remembered the last time she'd been seen. It had been on the sidewalk 3 months earlier, when a pair of teenagers had pointed at her scar and laughed. One had whispered loudly enough for her to hear. Ugly forever. That memory was stitched into her like thread that wouldn't snap. And yet here she was, walking willingly into a room where cruelty wore silk gloves and a smile. A waiter passed, offering a tray of champagne. Sonora took a glass to steady her hands. The bubbles fizzed against her lips, sharp and cold. She swallowed quickly, then pressed herself closer to the wall, praying to disappear. Clarissa had promised to meet her here, but Sonora had lost sight of her the moment the crowd swallowed her up. Alone, she felt the isolation more acutely, as though the gala had been designed to remind her how little she belonged. On the far side of the room, laughter spiked again. A woman in silver silk leaned into her companion, eyes darting toward Sonora. She whispered something, and they both smirked. The weight of their derision pressed Sonora deeper into her corner. She considered leaving. She could slip out the way she came, vanish into the night, and no one would remember she had been here. No one except the ones who would retell the story later. Did you see her? The scarred one who thought she could mingle with us? But something inside her refused. Pride? Stubbornness? Perhaps the last fragile thread of dignity she had left. She straightened her back, placed the half-drunk champagne on the tray of another passing waiter, and forced herself to look at the grandeur without flinching. That was when the air shifted. It wasn't the orchestra. They continued their lilting piece, oblivious. It wasn't the guests. Their chatter still buzzed like bees around honey. It was something heavier, almost primal. A ripple of awareness moved through the room, and suddenly heads turned. Conversations faltered. The laughter thinned. Lance Carrington had arrived. The son of a dynasty. The architect of empires. The man whose very name bent markets. Lance moved into the ballroom without hurry, and yet the room bent around him as though gravity itself obeyed his stride. He wore power like another layer of clothing, stitched into the cut of his tailored suit, etched into the deliberate calm of his posture. His reputation preceded him. Ruthless, brilliant, cold. The tabloids called him untouchable. The city whispered of him like a storm one could sense but never predict. Men envied and feared him. Women schemed to catch his eye. And yet, his expression remained unreadable, his gaze scanning the room with a predator's detachment. Sonora froze. Her breath caught in her chest. She hadn't expected to see him so soon. The Carrington Gala was his domain, yes, but she had imagined him too distant, too surrounded by admirers to ever drift near her shadowed corner. She lowered her gaze quickly, hoping invisibility would cloak her. But when she glanced up again, he was still scanning, and this time his eyes, gray, steel bright, caught hers. It was like being struck. For a heartbeat, she thought she imagined it. The chandelier's fractured light into strange patterns. Perhaps she was caught in one. But no. The longer she looked, the more certain she became. Lance Carrington was looking directly at her. The ballroom seemed to tilt. Around her, murmurs began, hushed but sharp. Who is she? Why would he? No, it can't be her. Sonora's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to look away, but his gaze held her, steady and unblinking. In a room filled with the city's most polished, he was staring at the scarred woman trying desperately not to fall apart. Her stomach knotted. Was this mockery? Curiosity? A passing glance mistaken for something more? She tried to convince herself it was nothing, that she was inventing meaning where none existed. But still, her pulse thundered, and her skin burned beneath his attention. Lance Carrington had chosen his focus, and for reasons she could not fathom, that focus was her. The orchestra reached a crescendo, the violins rising in a storm of sound. The crowd began to move again, laughter regaining its rhythm, but the tension remained, a current running invisible between them. Sonora's thoughts tangled. She had come tonight prepared for whispers, for ridicule, for invisibility. But she had not prepared for this, for the possibility that someone like him could see her at all. And if he kept looking, if he kept walking closer, what then? The question burned in her chest as cruelly as the fire that had marked her all those years ago. Would you dare stand tall in a room designed to make you feel small? The moment passed, his eyes on hers, the music swelling around them, and Sonora felt the world threatening to collapse into itself. But the world, relentless as ever, refused to stop turning. Conversation slowly rekindled, though its tone was changed. Sharper, laced with curiosity, laced with venom. Clarissa found her at last, slipping through the crowd like a blade. Clarissa was small in stature, but large in presence. Her auburn curls piled high, her green dress shimmering like bottled emeralds. She saw the way Sonora's chest rose and fell too fast, the way her fingers worried the seams of her clutch, and she didn't ask what had happened. Clarissa always knew. "You're holding your breath," she murmured, pressing a glass of champagne into Sonora's hand. "Stop giving them the satisfaction." Sonora forced a breath out, then another, though the knot in her throat stayed. "I shouldn't have come." And let them win? Clarissa's eyes sparked, fierce as fire. Not tonight, not ever. Her friend had always been her anchor. When the fire stole Sonora's childhood home, her family scattered like ashes, Clarissa was the one who stayed, the one who didn't look away when others recoiled. But even anchors could not keep a ship from knowing it was adrift. Across the ballroom, Laughter swelled again. Rowena Hale's laughter, gilded and cruel. Sonora didn't have to turn her head to know it was directed at her. Rowena had perfected mockery into an art form. Draped in silver silk that caught every glimmer of light, she moved with the practiced ease of someone who had never been told no. She was everything the world praised, flawless, glittering, venom in perfume form. Her eyes found Sonora now, sliding over her like measuring tape before dismissing her entirely. Rowena's smirk said what her lips did not. "You don't belong here?" Clarissa noticed too. "Ignore her," she said tightly. "She feeds on fear. Don't give her yours." But Sonora felt the weight anyway. She turned slightly, letting her gaze catch on one of the paintings hung high above the ballroom. A seascape, wild waves breaking against rocks, spray frozen midair by the brushstrokes of some long-dead artist. For a moment, she imagined herself on that canvas. An artist. That had once been her dream. She used to lose herself for hours in sketching and painting in the messy joy of creating something that belonged only to her. But the fire had burned more than her skin. It had burned her belief that anyone would ever see beauty in her work when they could not see beauty in her. Now she survived on small jobs, bookkeeping, waiting tables, anything that kept her alive but never fed her soul. Clarissa touched her arm gently. "You're thinking about leaving." "I'm thinking about disappearing," Sonora admitted, voice low. "Don't. Not tonight." On the other side of the room, Lance Carrington stood in a knot of powerful men, his presence a gravitational force that commanded all attention. Gideon Blake, his oldest friend and business partner, leaned in close, muttering something. Gideon had always been the voice of reason, the one who reminded Lance that not every battle was worth waging, not every empire worth building. "Your gaze lingered too long," Gideon said now, his voice clipped with warning. Lance didn't bother to deny it. "I'm allowed to look." "You're allowed to destroy yourself too," Gideon countered. "That's what will happen if you chase something you can't afford." Lance's jaw flexed, though his expression betrayed nothing. He was born into privilege, but he hadn't coasted on it. He had doubled his inheritance, clawed his way into industries his family had dismissed as beneath them, and made himself feared in boardrooms across continents. Control was his gospel, power his currency. Yet beneath it all, beneath the polished steel of his exterior, was a truth he would never admit. He was lonely. He had built walls so high that no one scaled them without losing breath. Women adored the idea of him, the name of him, the bank accounts, and the tailored suits. But no one had wanted him. And when his eyes found Sonora, scarred, trembling but defiant in her way, something cracked he hadn't expected to. Rowena approached then, gliding across the floor, her smile rehearsed and weaponized. "Lance," she purred, her hand brushing his sleeve as though she still had the right. "You should be careful where you rest your eyes. People are watching." He looked at her, cold and sharp. "Then let them watch." Rowena's smile tightened, though she recovered quickly. "You deserve someone who matches you. Not—" Her eyes flicked toward Sonora, disdain dripping. "A charity case." The words slid into the air like poison. Gideon stiffened but stayed silent, waiting. Lance didn't answer immediately. He sipped his drink, let the silence stretch, then said, "What I deserve, Rowena, is not your concern." She faltered, just slightly, before pasting her mask back on. But Sonora felt the weight of her attention from across the room, a promise that tonight's cruelty was only the beginning. Meanwhile, Clarissa drew Sonora toward a quieter corner, speaking softly. "You've spent years convincing yourself you don't deserve joy. I wish you could see what I see. You survived what should have broken you. That doesn't make you less, Sonora. It makes you more." Sonora swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to believe her friend. But years of rejection had left a mark deeper than any scar. The music shifted, a new melody unfurling through the room. Sonora's eyes darted once more toward Lance, against her will. He was still there, still unyielding, still watching. And with every passing moment, her world tilted further from what it had always been. Because curiosity had replaced fear. Because for the first time in years, someone had looked at her as though she wasn't ruined. And she didn't know if she had the strength to resist the fragile ember of hope sparking to life in her chest. Would you allow someone to see the part of you the world has always told you to hide? After the dance at the gala, Sonora told herself it had meant nothing. A passing moment, a billionaire's whim, a cruel trick played by the universe to remind her she would always be out of place in rooms like that. But the lie didn't hold long. The next morning, when she unlocked the door to the cramped walk-up apartment she rented, a bouquet waited outside her door. Not roses, too obvious, too practiced. White lilies, pure and understated, wrapped in paper that smelled faintly of cedar. The card was simple, signed with a single initial, L. Her hand trembled as she held it. By the end of the week, there were 2 more deliveries. Wildflowers one morning, sunflowers the next. They weren't ostentatious displays. They felt deliberate, as though someone had taken time to consider what might soften her guarded heart instead of what might dazzle the world. She tried to throw them away, tried to remind herself that men like Lance Carrington didn't see women like her. They collected them, discarded them, turned their lives into whispers and footnotes. But still, she found herself keeping the lilies in a chipped vase on her counter, watching them bloom even as her chest clenched with confusion. When Clarissa noticed, she raised a brow. "Those aren't grocery store carnations, Sonora." "They're nothing," Sonora muttered. Clarissa smirked, unconvinced. "Nothing doesn't make you blush." Lance didn't wait long. 2 nights later, Sonora found herself walking home after a long shift at the diner where she worked part-time. Her apron still smelled of grease, her shoes ached, and the fluorescent lights of the city made her eyes burn. She turned the corner and froze. He was there, standing beneath a street lamp, immaculate in a coat that cut a sharp silhouette against the night. Not a driver, not an assistant. Just him. "I wanted to see you," he said simply, as though it were natural, as though he weren't who he was. Her first instinct was anger. "You can't just show up like this." His lips curved faintly. "Why not?" "Because people like you don't talk to people like me outside of galas." "Maybe I don't like people like me," he countered. His certainty unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. And yet, when he suggested coffee, just coffee, a corner cafe still open at midnight, she found herself saying yes against all reason. That night became the first of many. They met in strange, quiet corners of the city, diners half closed, cafes that smelled of burnt beans and comfort, bookstores with crooked shelves where the owner barely looked up. There, away from chandeliers and gossip, Lance seemed different. He laughed, really laughed. Not the polished chuckle that smoothed over boardrooms, but a low, unguarded sound that made Sonora's stomach ache with nerves. She sketched him once on a napkin absent-mindedly, the sharp cut of his jaw, the storm-gray intensity of his eyes. He caught her. "Is that me?" he asked, leaning closer. She blushed, crumpling the napkin. "It's nothing. Just lines." "Keep it," he insisted, sliding it back to her. "I'd rather you draw me than anyone else." Her chest tightened. Did he mean it? Or was she just a challenge, something different to fill his boredom? Rowena thought she had the answer. By the second week, rumors spread like fire. Rowena whispered to her circle of socialites, to men with hungry ears, to anyone who would listen. "Sonora Jameson wants his money. She clawed her way into his sight, and she won't let go until she bleeds him dry." The tabloids snapped it up. A grainy photo of Lance and Sonora leaving a cafe appeared online. The headline cruel: "Billionaire's charity case. From gala to coffee date." Sonora saw it the next morning. The article burned through her veins like acid. She slammed her phone down, fighting tears. She had known this would happen, known the world would reduce her to nothing more than a scar and a scheme. Still, seeing it carved into print made her stomach twist. When Lance called that night, she didn't answer. Meanwhile, Gideon wasn't silent. He cornered Lance in his office, leaning across the polished desk. "Tell me the truth. Is this about her or about you?" Lance didn't look up from the contract he was signing. "What do you mean? You've spent years letting the world believe you don't need anyone. Now suddenly you're chasing a woman the world dismisses. Are you sure this isn't rebellion against the people who worship you?" Lance's pen paused. He met Gideon's gaze, unflinching. "I don't rebel. I choose. And I chose her." Gideon shook his head, though his eyes softened slightly. "Then don't hurt her. She's not like the rest of us. She won't survive the games we play." But it wasn't Lance who hurt her. It was the world. 2 weeks later, Sonora was working another shift at the diner. The air reeked of fried onions and spilled coffee. She was bent over the counter, sketching in the margins of her notepad during a lull when the door swung open. He walked in. Lance Carrington. Every head turned. Forks froze midair. The manager nearly dropped a tray of glasses, and Sonora, her heart stopped. He didn't belong here, in this greasy corner of the city where cracked vinyl booths sagged and ketchup bottles clogged. Yet there he stood, immaculate as always, scanning the room until his eyes locked on her. Her coworkers snickered. "Is that your billionaire?" one whispered too loudly. "Guess she wasn't lying after all," another smirked. The manager approached, flustered. "Mr. Carrington, we don't usually get—" "I'm here for Sonora," Lance said simply. The whispers ignited into wildfire. Customers craned their necks, phones lifted, cameras flashing. Sonora's chest constricted. The humiliation was worse than anything Rowena could have orchestrated. Here, in her world, she was exposed. Not as glamorous, not as mysterious. Just a scarred woman in a cheap uniform with flour smudged on her sleeve. She wanted to vanish. "Lance, you can't be here," she hissed when he reached her. "Why not?" His voice was calm, his expression unreadable. "Because this—" She gestured around her, to the gawking faces, to the cheap linoleum floors. "This is my life, and you just turned it into a circus." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't care about the circus, I care about you." But she couldn't hear it. Not over the laughter, the whispers, the way her coworkers smirked as though her heart was something to mock. She pulled off her apron and fled into the night, the cold air burning her lungs, shame tearing at her ribs. Behind her, he called her name once. Twice. But she didn't stop. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment, Sonora asked herself the question that haunted her most. Was she brave enough to let him see her scars, or foolish enough to let him break her with them? The night after the scene at the diner, Sonora tried to close herself off again. She told herself she couldn't keep allowing him into the corners of her life where shame and survival lived. But Lance wasn't a man who obeyed distance. He found her anyway. It was late, the city softened by rain when he knocked on her apartment door. She almost didn't answer. She almost let him stand in the hall until he gave up and walked back to his world of steel and glass. But something in the steadiness of the knock and the quiet persistence of it forced her to open the door. He stood there without umbrella, rainwater dripping down the collar of his coat. He looked at her as though she were the only anchor left in a storm he couldn't control. "I'm not here to embarrass you again," he said quietly. "I'm here to listen." And against her better judgment, she let him in. The apartment was small. One room with walls the color of faded parchment, canvases stacked in corners half covered by drop cloths. He noticed them immediately, though she tried to push them aside with her foot. "You paint," he said. "Not anymore," she replied too quickly. He didn't argue. He just sat at her small kitchen table, folding his large frame into the cramped chair with patience that looked foreign on him. She brewed coffee because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. When she finally sat across from him, steam rising between them, silence stretched long and raw. "You want the truth?" she whispered at last, staring into her cup. "Yes." His voice didn't falter. She let the words spill, each one heavier than the last. "I was 16 when the fire happened. My parents were out. It was just me and Nelson, my little brother. He was asleep, and by the time I smelled the smoke, the house was already choking on it. I dragged him out, shoved him through a window before the flames reached his room. I thought we'd made it, but I went back for something stupid. A box of my sketches. That's when the ceiling came down." Her hand lifted unconsciously to trace the scar down her jaw. "It should have killed me. Sometimes I think maybe it did. Nelson survived untouched. But when I woke up in the hospital, he wouldn't even look at me. He hated me for being the reminder of what we lost. Eventually, he left. He hasn't spoken to me in years." Her voice broke. "I saved his life, and he abandoned me anyway." Silence hung heavy in the apartment. She expected pity. She braced for it. But Lance's eyes weren't soft with pity. They burned with something sharper. "I know what it means to live unloved," he said, his tone steady, almost surgical. She looked up. "My parents had everything. Money, houses, servants, influence, but they didn't have each other. My father spent more time with his mistresses than with his family. My mother, she wore diamonds to distract from the emptiness in her chest. They taught me early that wealth buys everything but love. That lesson has never left me." For the first time since she'd met him, his eyes carried no armor. Only exhaustion, only truth. "You think I chase power for its own sake," he continued. "But I chase it because I learned the world doesn't care about love. Control was the only thing I could keep. Their silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with scars, with confessions, with the knowledge that two very different lives had been twisted by the same cruel hand." Sonora reached across the table before she realized she was doing it. Her fingers brushed his. He didn't move away. Their eyes met. Her pulse hammered. And when he leaned across the space, his lips met hers with a tenderness that shocked her more than fire ever had. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't conquest. It was raw, unguarded need for closeness. For the first time, Sonora kissed a man without flinching. When they parted, both breathless, both stunned, she whispered, "This can't work." And he said, "Then let's make it work anyway." But the world was not finished testing them. Rowena had been patient, watching from the sidelines as whispers grew, as the city speculated about the scarred woman who had captured Lance Carrington's attention. But patience was not her nature. She wanted blood. It was she who found Nelson. The younger Jameson had reemerged in the city weeks earlier, drifting between schemes, debt collectors snapping at his heels. His desperation reeked, but to Rowena it was opportunity. She cornered him in a hotel bar, pressed a manicured hand to his arm, and murmured promises of money, of access, of revenge. "You want your sister back?" she asked sweetly. "She's been flaunting herself on the arm of a man far too powerful for her. Don't you think you deserve some of that fortune she's stealing?" Nelson's eyes darkened. He had not seen Sonora in years, but the wound of resentment had never healed. In his mind, she was still the reason their lives had burned to ash, and if she had found a way to crawl out of that ruin, why shouldn't he benefit? Rowena smiled as she watched the hatred twist in him. "Help me remind her of who she really is, and we'll both get what we want." Sonora knew nothing of this when she stood by the window that night, watching rain streak the glass after Lance had gone. Her lips still tingled from his kiss. Her chest ached with fear and wonder. But across the city, Rowena was pulling strings, and Nelson Jameson, her lost brother, was about to return, not as the boy she had once saved, but as the weapon that might destroy her. Would you forgive the one who abandoned you if they returned only to wound you again? The betrayal came like smoke seeping under a locked door. Slow, suffocating, impossible to ignore once it had filled every corner of their lives. Sonora had gone to bed the night before with the memory of Lance's lips still lingering on hers, the fragile warmth of his confession pressed into her bones. She'd woken to the sound of her phone vibrating relentlessly on the bedside table. The messages came in waves, Clarissa's frantic voice notes, co-workers' mocking texts, a dozen unread headlines splashed across the screen. Scarred seductress snags billionaire for revenge. Sonora Jameson, playing the long game. Beauty burns, but pity pays. The words blurred as she scrolled, but the photographs were clear. Grainy shots of her and Lance leaving cafes, fragments of her smile caught in motion, her hand brushing his as though intimacy was proof of a crime. And there, at the heart of the article, was a quote. Her brother's name. Nelson Jameson. He'd told the tabloids that she had spent years nursing resentment against the world, plotting to attach herself to the city's most powerful man not for love, but for revenge. That the scar was a weapon she wielded, a sympathy card she played, a lie dressed in satin. The ground dropped out beneath her. She sat on the edge of her bed, her chest heaving, her hands shaking so violently, the phone slipped and clattered against the floor. Her brother, her blood, the boy she had dragged from fire, the boy she had burned for, had sold her. And worse, he had made her love look like a scheme. Clarissa burst into her apartment minutes later, coat half-buttoned, hair tangled from rushing. "Sonora, don't look at it," she pleaded, snatching up the phone. "They twist everything. They always do. You can't believe—" "It's Nelson," Sonora whispered. "He said it." Clarissa stilled. The words hung heavy, sharp as glass. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "He wouldn't—" "He did," Sonora's voice cracked. "And now it's everywhere." Across the city, Lance Carrington faced his board. The conference room was built of glass and steel, suspended high above the skyline, designed to make even power feel small before the sprawl of the city. Tonight, it felt like a cage. The board members sat stiff in their chairs, every gaze sharpened with suspicion. Articles lay printed in neat stacks, headlines glaring from glossy paper. "This is unacceptable," one director snapped. "Your personal indulgences are spilling into the company. Investors are calling. We've had 3 contracts delayed just today because of this circus." "It isn't true," Lance said flatly. "Perhaps not," another countered. "But perception is truth in business. And the perception is that you've entangled yourself with a woman who is either a liar, a manipulator, or both." The words should have slid off him. He'd built his empire on refusing to bend, on forcing the world to obey his terms. But for the first time, their accusations found a crack. Not because he doubted Sonora, but because he knew how merciless the world could be. He had no defense against whispers that fed themselves. Gideon's voice cut through the din, steadier than the rest. "This isn't about business," he said. "It's about fear. You all worship him when his decisions build empires. But the moment he risks himself for something human, you act like it's weakness." But even Gideon's defense could not silence the doubts circling the room. When the meeting adjourned, Lance stayed seated, his eyes fixed on the city lights burning below. For once, victory didn't feel inevitable. For once, he felt the weight of losing, not money, not power, but something far rarer. Sonora tried to vanish. She stopped answering calls, stopped stepping into the cafes where they used to meet, stopped opening her curtains as though sunlight itself would expose her further. She had become a shadow of herself, moving only between work and the silence of her apartment. She told herself it was for him, that if she disappeared, the scandal would fade, the tabloids would feast on someone else, his empire would heal. But the lie didn't ease the hollow ache in her chest. When Lance found her, because of course he would, she was at the diner, hunched over the counter, her uniform crumpled from a double shift. He sat across from her as if the world weren't burning, as if nothing had changed. "You think I'll walk away?" he said quietly. You should walk away, she whispered back. Everything they say, it's poison, Lance, and it's my fault. My scars, my family, my past. I'm ruining you. His hand reached for hers, but she pulled away before he could touch her. You deserve someone who won't drag you down, she said, her throat thick. Someone unscarred, someone the world will accept. You think I care about their acceptance? His eyes burned. You have to, she snapped, louder than she intended. You built your life on it. You can't throw it away for me. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked wounded, his jaw clenched, his gaze flickering with something raw. But he didn't argue. He only said her name once, softly, as though it might tether her back. She stood before he could try again, her knees shaking. Don't follow me. And this time, he obeyed. Rowena found him later. She waited in his office, draped across one of the leather chairs as though she owned it, silver jewelry glittering under the recessed lights. When he walked in, she smiled like a snake. I warned you, she said. She was never worthy of you. Now the whole world knows it. His stare was glacial, but she pressed on, enjoying the taste of her triumph. You've built an empire that could crush nations, Lance. Don't throw it away for pity. Don't let her ruin you. You belong with someone who can stand beside you without dragging your name through the mud. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. You belong with me. His silence was worse than fury. His expression carved from stone, he stepped past her, poured himself a drink, and stood with his back to her. You mistake noise for truth, he said at last. But truth doesn't change because you want it to. Rowena's smile faltered, but she recovered, her voice sharp. Then you'll lose everything. And when she leaves you, as she will, you'll remember who stood here warning you. She left him in silence, but her words lingered like smoke. Sonora didn't wait for him to choose. That night, she packed the few things she owned into a worn suitcase. She left the lilies, now withered, on the windowsill. She didn't leave a note. She didn't dare. When Clarissa arrived the next morning, the apartment was empty. She found the suitcase gone, the canvases stacked neatly as though Sonora couldn't bear to take them. Only a single sketch remained on the table, the napkin portrait she had once drawn of Lance, folded carefully as if it were both goodbye and confession. Clarissa pressed a hand to her mouth to stop the sob rising. Sonora had left because she believed it was the only way to save him, because in her darkest hour she couldn't imagine a world where her scars were anything but a curse. And Lance Carrington, billionaire, ruthless, untouchable, stood at the edge of the city lights that night, staring into the dark as though he could will her back. For the first time in his life, he realized power meant nothing when the only thing he wanted was gone. Would you walk away from love if you believed it would destroy the one you cared for? The city seemed to move on without them, as if the scandal hadn't torn holes in their lives. Headlines shifted to fresher prey. The tabloids feasted on new names. But for Sonora and Lance, the silence that followed was heavier than the noise had ever been. Sonora withdrew deeper into herself. She'd left her apartment for a smaller room on the edge of the city, a place with peeling wallpaper and a bed that groaned when she turned. She told herself she'd chosen it because no one would find her there. But every night, as she lay staring at the cracked ceiling, she admitted the truth. She was hiding. Not from the cameras, not from Rowena's smirk, not even from Nelson's betrayal. She was hiding from what she had felt when Lance had looked at her like she was the only thing in the world worth keeping. Because now she had convinced herself it couldn't be true. Clarissa, however, refused to let her fade away. She barged into the room one evening, carrying takeout cartons and fury in equal measure. She dropped both on the flimsy table and fixed Sonora with a glare sharp enough to cut steel. You didn't survive fire to burn out in silence, she snapped. Sonora flinched. Clarissa, please. No, you don't get to hide from me. I watched you crawl out of the ashes when no one else believed you'd walk again. I watched you hold your head up when strangers mocked you in the street. And now you're going to tell me you're giving up because some magazine called you names? Because your brother, who hasn't earned the right to be in your life, sold his soul to Rowena? Sonora blinked, startled. What do you mean? Clarissa pulled a folded printout from her bag and slammed it on the table. This. A friend of mine at the newsroom slipped me proof. Bank transfers. Nelson's name on them. He didn't just speak to the tabloids. He took money from Rowena to do it. She bought his silence for years, and then she bought his betrayal. The air drained from Sonora's lungs. No, she whispered, shaking her head. He's my brother. I saved him. And he sold you anyway, Clarissa said, her own voice breaking. I'm sorry, Nora, but you need to hear it. He didn't fall into this by accident. He chose it. Tears stung Sonora's eyes. She pressed her palms against her mouth, her body rocking with the weight of it. I thought maybe he hated me, maybe he resented me, but I never thought he'd... She choked on the words. Rowena used him. Clarissa gripped her shoulders, grounding her. Rowena used him, yes, but he let himself be used. That's not on you. That's on him. Sonora sobbed, the sound ragged, tearing. But Clarissa's voice stayed fierce. Listen to me. You are Sonora Jameson. You didn't get scarred to vanish. You got scarred because life tried to end you and failed. Don't let Nelson's weakness define your strength. Sonora's tears slid down her scarred cheek, shimmering in the faint lamplight. And what about him, Clarissa? I ruined him. They're questioning his empire, his name. He deserves someone clean, someone who doesn't drag smoke into his lungs every time she breathes. Clarissa's expression softened, but her words didn't lose their bite. Maybe he doesn't want clean. Maybe he wants real. Maybe he wants you. Across the city, Gideon faced Lance in the sanctuary of his office. The skyline glittered beyond the windows, but Lance wasn't looking at it. He was pouring a drink, the rare tremor in his hand betraying what his face did not. You look like hell, Gideon said bluntly. Lance gave a humorless laugh. You don't waste words. Neither do you, usually. Gideon leaned against the desk, arms crossed. But you've been letting Rowena's poison linger too long. You're retreating. I'm protecting her, Lance countered. The more I fight, the more they tear her apart. I won't be the reason she drowns. Gideon's eyes narrowed. So you'd rather let her drown alone? The words hit harder than Lance expected. You built an empire by fighting harder than anyone, Gideon pressed on. You clawed power from men twice your size, twice your age. You refused to bend when the world tried to break you. And now? Now you're going to quit because it's love instead of business? Lance's jaw tightened. Business doesn't bleed. And love does, Gideon said. That's what makes it worth it. He paused, then slid a folder across the desk. And before you convince yourself this is about pity, look, I had it traced. Transfers. From Rowena's shell account straight into Nelson Jameson's. It wasn't just Rowena twisting the knife. Nelson was the hand holding it. Lance's head lifted sharply. His knuckles whitened around the glass. Yes, Gideon said grimly. She paid him to betray his sister, to betray her. And Sonora still blames herself. The fury that swept Lance's features was cold, controlled. Then Rowena will pay, and Nelson will face her first. The storm inside him didn't ease until the next night, when he found himself standing in the rain outside the rundown building Sonora had fled to. He didn't know how he'd tracked her. He only knew every instinct, every thread of his being had pulled him there. When she opened the door, shock widened her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a threadbare sweater, her hair pulled back loosely, her scars catching the faint light of the hallway. She looked breakable, and it broke him. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. I don't care. His voice was raw, stripped of the armor he wore for the world. I'm done caring what they say, what they think. I don't need their approval. I need you. Her lips trembled. Lance. No. He stepped closer, close enough that the air between them trembled. Listen to me. I know the truth now. Rowena bought Nelson. He betrayed you because he was too weak to carry his own failures. Don't carry his shame, Sonora. It isn't yours. She staggered back, the words hitting her like blows. Nelson, Yes, Lance said, his tone hard but steady. He sold you. But listen to me. You are not ruined. You are not poison. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You walked out of fire and kept walking, even when the world spat on you. And I will not let their lies make you disappear. Her tears spilled. They'll ruin you, Lance. Your empire, your name. Let them try, he said fiercely. He reached out, cupping her scarred cheek with reverence. If I lose everything and still have you, I'll have more than I ever did with all of it. Her chest shuddered. She tried to turn away, but his hand held her gently in place. Look at me. You are not my weakness. You are my salvation. And then his lips were on hers again, not tentative this time, but desperate, claiming, as though he were anchoring himself to the only truth he still believed in. She kissed him back with the same desperation, the same fire, the same surrender that came when two people realized there was no running left to do. When they broke apart, breathless, she pressed her forehead to his. I don't know if I can survive this storm, she admitted. His thumb brushed her cheek. Then we'll survive it together. The night didn't erase the pain. It didn't silence the tabloids or undo Nelson's betrayal or Rowena's poison. But it lit a spark that reminded them both why they had reached for each other in the first place. Not because it was easy, but because it was impossible. And in that impossibility, they found hope. Would you choose to face the fire with the one you love, even if the world wanted you to burn? The charity event was meant to be a jewel in the city's calendar. An evening of gowns and tuxedos, champagne fountains, and speeches gilded with promises of philanthropy. But for Sonora, walking into the grand hall with Lance at her side, it felt more like a battlefield. The chandeliers burned bright above them, but the air carried a sharper current, anticipation sharpened by scandal. Whispers chased their steps as though every heel click echoed through rumor. Cameras flashed at the entrance, and though Lance's hand was steady at her back, Sonora's stomach coiled tight. Clarissa had helped her dress. A simple gown, emerald satin that brought warmth to her scar rather than hiding it. Don't shrink, her friend had said, brushing hair back from her face. Not tonight. If you're going to burn, burn brilliant. But Sonora knew this night wasn't just about her. It was about Rowena, who had orchestrated every cut, every poisoned whisper, and about Nelson, whose betrayal had set the city against her. The trap was obvious, but there was no running anymore. She was tired of hiding. Rowena made her move as soon as Lance and Sonora stepped into the crowd. She glided forward in a gown of molten silver, her smile diamond sharp, her voice pitched to carry across the polished hall. Well, if it isn't the Phoenix and her patron, she drawled, lifting her glass. Tell me, Sonora, how does it feel to rise from ashes only to sell yourself to the highest bidder? Laughter rippled through the audience, cruel and eager. The orchestra faltered, musicians glancing nervously at each other before continuing with hesitant notes. Sonora froze. The old instinct clawed at her, flee, vanish, disappear before the fire consumed her. But before she could move, Lance's hand closed over hers, strong, unyielding. He stepped forward, his voice cutting clean through the noise. Enough! The room stilled. Even Rowena's smirk wavered. Lance's eyes swept the crowd, his words deliberate, forged like steel. I've spent my life building walls high enough to keep out every pretender, every opportunist, every empty smile. And then she walked into my world. This woman? He turned, his gaze fierce as it locked on Sonora. This is the woman I love, the only one who has ever seen me. Not my fortune, not my empire. Me. Gasps broke out, some sharp, some odd. Rowena's face paled, though her smile fought to stay in place. Sonora's heart hammered. She could have let him stand alone, let his declaration be the shield that protected her. But she was done being shielded. She stepped forward, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength with every word. "You want the truth?" she said, her gaze cutting through the crowd. "You've heard whispers, read headlines, believed lies. So hear it from me." She lifted her chin, the scar catching the light like a brand of defiance. "My scars came from a fire. I went back into the flames for sketches, silly scraps of art that mattered to me, and I was burned for it. I survived, but survival came with a price. My brother, Nelson, never forgave me for what we lost. And when he saw a chance to sell my pain, he took it. Rowena gave him that chance." The crowd gasped louder. A name now, a betrayal named. Heads swiveled, searching, some recognizing Nelson in the corner of the room where he had tried to remain unnoticed. His face blanched as if the chandeliers themselves had burned him raw. Sonora's voice hardened. "Rowena didn't unearth my secrets by chance. Nelson, my own blood, handed them to her. She paid him to betray me, and he let her. He gave her the knife, and she twisted it. Every article, every cruel whisper you fed on came from their hands." All eyes darted back to Rowena, whose flawless mask cracked, her smirk collapsing into fury. "Lies," she spat, but the word carried no weight now. The silence of the room smothered it. Sonora pressed on, steady as steel. "Yes, Lance loves me, but not because of pity, not because of charity. He loves me because he sees me, the parts no one else dared to look at. And I love him because beneath the walls he built, beneath the empire and the steel, is a man who is more than money, more than power. A man who is human." The silence that followed wasn't cruel anymore. It wasn't mocking. It was stunned, reverent. For the first time, Sonora wasn't just the scarred girl in the shadows. She was a woman who stood unflinching before the world that had tried to erase her. Rowena's lips parted, desperate for retort, but no words came. Her gaze darted wildly, seeking an ally, but none stepped forward. Nelson, pale and sweating, stumbled toward the exit, but the crowd's eyes tracked him like predators, murmurs swelling in waves of condemnation. And then, applause. Soft at first, scattered, but it grew, spread, surged through the hall until the room thundered with it. Not mockery, not derision, admiration. Sonora's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision. And then Lance was pulling her into his arms, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that silenced everything else. It wasn't tentative, wasn't careful, it was fierce, triumphant, claiming the future in front of everyone who had once doubted them. The crowd erupted, some with cheers, some with shock, but none could deny what they had seen. Love, not scandal, not lies, stood victorious. When they broke apart, foreheads pressed together, Sonora whispered, "We did it." Lance smiled, raw and unguarded. "No, you did it. You burned brighter than all of them." The world had tried to strip her down to scars and shame, but tonight Sonora Jameson had risen, unbroken, unashamed, and loved. Would you have had the courage to speak your truth when the world demanded your silence? The city felt different when you stopped hiding from it. For years I had walked these streets like they were mine, glass towers, polished marble, steel veins that bent to my will. I thought ownership meant belonging. I thought power meant peace. But power had been a fortress, and peace had been a silence too loud to bear. Now, with Sonora's hand in mine, the city was no longer something to conquer. It was something to breathe, to live, to finally let in. We moved through the night streets without disguises, without shadows. People still glanced. How could they not? Cameras had once made us prey, our names fuel for gossip. But the looks now weren't barbed with scorn. They were softened, sharpened by something else. Respect, curiosity, awe. The kind of hush people give not to scandal, but to survival. Her fingers laced with mine, small but steady, grounding me more firmly than boardrooms, contracts, or towers ever had. I looked down at her profile as we passed under the streetlights. The scar that had once made the world cruel now caught light like fire, and she carried it not as burden but as crown. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't walking beside survival. I was walking beside triumph. In the weeks that followed the gala, Sonora began reclaiming pieces of herself I had only glimpsed. She filled sketchbooks again. I'd catch her at the kitchen table in the early hours, charcoal smudging her fingers, strands of hair falling into her face as she bent over her work. Sometimes she drew me, sharper than I thought I looked, eyes shadowed, jaw set. But over time, the sketches softened. She captured laughter I didn't even realize I'd let slip. She captured the curve of my mouth when she teased me. She didn't draw scars to erase them. She drew scars as light. One afternoon, I came to the small studio she'd rented on the edge of the art district. The walls leaned under the weight of canvases. Faces of strangers, children laughing, women holding their heads high, and streets of this city bursting with color she alone had seen. At the center stood one portrait, herself. Not the girl burned into shame, not the one tabloids had mocked. This was a woman with her chin raised, her scar not hidden but gilded by her own brushstrokes, eyes fierce as though daring the world to look away. She turned as I entered, caught me staring, her cheeks flushed. "It's who I want to be." I stepped behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, resting my chin against her shoulder. "It's who you already are." For once, she didn't argue. My world shifted too. I still signed contracts. I still sat at the head of boardrooms, men and women watching me with the same mixture of fear and admiration. But I no longer mistook fear for loyalty. I no longer mistook silence for respect. Gideon noticed first. After one particularly grueling meeting, he lingered as the others left. "You smile too much now," he said dryly, lips quirking. I raised a brow. "That's your analysis? You used to fight for empires. Now you fight for her. Suits you better." I let the words hang, and for the first time in years, I didn't deny them. Rowena faded quickly. The gala stripped her mask from her, and the city that once adored her glitter cracked its teeth on her downfall. Invitations vanished. Sponsors withdrew. She tried to claw back relevance with desperate appearances, but the sharpness that had once cut through rooms now fell flat. Without whispers to fuel her, she dwindled into silence, a cautionary tale. Nelson? He disappeared. Rumors whispered he'd fled the city after debts caught up with him. Some said he tried to crawl back to Rowena, only to find her too ruined to shield him. I didn't chase him. Sonora didn't either. Sometimes survival meant letting ghosts starve. Clarissa, however, only grew louder. She took up permanent residence at Sonora's studio, arms crossed, grin wide. "Told you so," she'd say, at least once an hour, until Sonora rolled her eyes and shoved a paintbrush at her. Truth be told, I was grateful for Clarissa. She had been the storm Sonora needed when I couldn't reach her. And I suspected she would always be there, the kind of friend who carried fire instead of water when life tried to drown you. One evening, weeks later, Sonora and I walked along the riverfront. The water shimmered like molten gold, the skyline rising above us, no longer a crown I had to wear, but a city I could finally share. She slipped her arm through mine, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. "You know what I realized?" she murmured. "What?" "That scars don't just mark you. They crown you. They prove you were stronger than what tried to end you." She lifted her head, eyes glinting with something I'd waited my whole life to see in someone else. Belief. "And love doesn't erase scars. It makes them beautiful." Her words settled into me deeper than applause, deeper than power. I stopped walking, turning her to face me. The street lamps bathed her in light, and I thought again of the fire that had once nearly taken her. That same fire had given me everything worth keeping. "You're right," I said, brushing my thumb over her cheek. Some scars break you, others crown you. She smiled, soft and fierce at once, and in that moment I knew. This, not empire, not fortune, was my victory. The world would continue. Scandals would flare, power would shift, fortunes would rise and fall. But when I looked at Sonora, I saw the only truth I'd ever needed. Survival turned to triumph, scars turned to light, love turned to life. And for the first time, I wasn't lonely at the top. I wasn't at the top at all. I was exactly where I belonged. Do you believe love can make scars beautiful?